Hi, this is John Harter, and welcome to the Keep On Groovin' Holiday Special. Today we'll be looking at the Christmas-themed releases and events of Jimmy's career both before and during the Experience era. Okay, some of it may be a bit of a stretch, but, hey, what the heck, it's Christmas! One of the bits of stretching regarding Jimmy and Christmas for me involves Curtis Knight and the Squires. As I've mentioned a number of times, on December 26, 1965, the band played George's Club 20 in Hackensack, New Jersey. As someone born in Passaic and being a former resident of Wallington and East Rutherford, it was always hard for me to imagine Jimmy was right in my backyard, albeit a few years before I was born, but it happened. The band played a mix of blues, R&B, and some rock and roll covers. Jimmy also took a few turns on lead vocal. Curtis even mentioned the band was being recorded that night, so must have been in the back of Jimmy's mind to really do well. These were among the tapes Ed Chalpin had in his possession, thanks to Jimmy's $1 contract that ended up yielding the Band of Gypsies album as a court settlement. After Jimmy's death, these tapes were recycled endlessly. Along with the umpteen re-edits of the studio songs, a large number of recordings from the December 26th show made it out. A box of PPX recordings came out in the late 90s claiming to be complete, but really weren't. Surprise, surprise. Included in there were around 24 live songs, and yes, even there, they had some re-edits and retitles to make it seem like there were more. I put them together in a playlist that resembled a concert set and would listen to it the week after Christmas in those bygone days when I would actually commute to work. Then when Experience Hendrix got to put out their version with some songs not on the complete version, I'd have even more to listen to. I'm probably going to have to do a whole show just on the Curtis Knight recordings and albums since it's a big part of Jimmy's legacy. So I'll end up talking about this album in depth there. Now, if you could have told Jimmy that night in Hackensack, exactly 1 year from then, he'd be in England performing with his own band, I wonder what his reaction would have been. But that's exactly what happened. In fact, backstage, the night after Christmas 1966, he came up with an idea for a song and started writing down the lyrics as they came to him. It started out with the first line, "Purple Haze, all in my brain." He originally had it titled as "Purple Haze, Jesus Saves," appropriate for Christmas. The band was hitting a lot of smaller venues at that point away from London, and for New Year's Eve, they ended up at Noel Redding's mom's place. It must have been really cold that night because as he walked in, he asked if he could do just one thing. "Let me stand next to your fire." A year after that, the Experience was one of the top draws on the concert circuit. They had been asked to be part of the Christmas on Earth Continued Festival, playing alongside such bands as Traffic, The Move, The Animals, and Pink Floyd, an appearance that ended up being Syd Barrett's last with the band. The concert was filmed. There are bits and pieces of it floating around out there. 2 segments of the Experience's performance were first shown in Jimmy Plays Monterey. Jimmy tells the audience to cover their ears before he breaks into a short and noisy version of Sgt. Pepper's. The other clip had Jimmy using the tremolo bar on his guitar to make it sound like a bagpipe before launching into Wild Thing. The video out there on the net these days has Foxy Lady in between those 2 clips. Overall, it's a really fun performance. Now, a few days earlier, the band recorded its last session for the BBC that ended up airing on Christmas Eve 1967. So now this is the best of segment of our show. That's what happens during the holidays. Here's a recap of that show that I did a couple episodes ago. The final session occurred in mid-December and was broadcast on Christmas Eve, 1967. All 5 songs recorded that night made the CD. The session started with Jimmy doing a fake jingle for BBC Radio 1. It was followed up by a couple of songs from Axis Bold as Love, Spanish Castle Magic, and Wait Until Tomorrow. Next up was another cover tune, this one by a little band called The Beatles. Jimmy had done Day Tripper with Curtis Knight way back when, so he knew it well enough. The liner notes hint the song may have had a secret special guest star and background vocals, just imagine. But no, it's not him. It's just Noel doing a very close Lennon imitation.
The session ended with the premiere of a new song Jimmy called Get My Heart Back Together, but later better known as Hear My Train A-Comin'. One thing in particular I do have to bring up about this session is Noel's enthusiastic participation, joining in on vocals a lot. Redding's frustration with the band are well known, and things started breaking down a few weeks later during the recording of Electric Ladyland. I think it's great to hear him really enjoying himself and adding a lot of fun to the whole session. Since it ends with Jimmy wishing everyone a Merry Christmas, this has kind of become a Christmas tradition with me, listening to it, usually on the way home from work on the 23rd, when I used to actually commute home from work.
Okay, we're back live again. Right around this time in 1967, there's a fun promo photo for Axis Bold as Love with Jimmy dressed as Santa. This would come into wider use later when the estate wanted to put out their own Christmas release. What was it? Well, during the Baggy sessions, Jimmy, Buddy, and Billy interspersed a few Christmas songs in with the songs they were getting ready for the concerts for December 31st and January 1st. Buddy starts off with a staggered march with Jimmy going into an instrumental Little Drummer Boy. After a few minutes, he moves into the loudest version of Silent Night you're likely to ever hear. They would wind down by playing Auld Lang Syne with Buddy pitching in with, well, not quite vocals, but Buddy doing Buddy. 1974 had already seen the Baggy sessions tapped for Burning Desire and Hoochie Coochie Man from Loose Ends. For the holidays that year, radio stations got a promotional single from Reprise called And a Happy New Year. It had Little Drummer Boy and Silent Night on one side and Auld Lang Syne on the other. I believe this may have technically been the first release of the Alan Douglas era. In 1979, the single was reissued to stations with all three songs on each side. It would be heard on rock stations during the holidays. I remember one time Darren called me up one time when it was on K-Rock in New York, and they were playing it on Christmas Eve, and he made sure that I heard it. So thanks again, Darren. Experienced Hendrix finally let the single be released to the public on their own release in 1999 on CD called Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Expanded a little bit, but whatever. The cover was that picture of Jimmy as Santa Claus. It includes the edited version, which is oddly enough shorter than the 1979 version when all three are together, an extended version which switches to mono at the point where the single version ends, and Three Little Bears, which is currently the only place you can get it now until they finally get around to reissuing War Heroes. Then eventually the circle was completed when it was reissued on vinyl a few years back for a Black Friday Record Day release in time for, you guessed it, Christmas. Oh, and just to complete all the years that we're covering in here, the only thing Christmas related in 1968 was a poetry reading Jimmy attended at St. Mark's Church in the Village on Christmas Eve. Sounds like a nice night. So anyway, that's our holiday episode. Everyone out there have a Merry Christmas or the holiday of your choice, and have a Happy New Year. In the year coming up, we'll be moving into a few new eras. There'll be a couple of label changes and a big change at the top. So I hope you all enjoy the ride. I'm John Harter. Thanks for listening, and Merry Christmas.